It is very windy today. It's crazy. All right, so take a look at the DOM manipulation. I think for this one, we can kind of solve it during the Q&A, and then if people have questions, we can kind of go through it there. But I think it's helpful sometimes to kind of see the flow of how we work through it. But so here's what we want to build. I have a button that when I click on that button, I want to change the styling of that button. And I also have an element on our page where I want to be able to increment its text content or change its text content based off of the amount of clicks that happen. So that's my ideal goal. So now I'm going to try to start piecing together the overall, what I need to do to be able to get that to happen. Well, first and foremost, I know that what I want to manipulate, I want to manipulate two different things. I want to manipulate my button, and I also want to manipulate that text. So now immediately I know in JavaScript, well, I need to query for those elements. I know I'm at least going to need two different queries. I'm going to need to query for the button, and I'm also going to need to be able to query for the text. So now I already have a little bit of a plan of attack of what I want to do. I only want something to happen when I click on the button. So now I know, okay, well, after I've queried for it, I only want something to happen when I click on a button. So now I know I need to listen for a click event on that button. And if I only want something to happen when that click actually occurs, well, then I know that my code needs to be inside of the event for that click event. Inside of that click event, what do I actually want to happen? Well, I want to change the button styles. Well, what is a great way to apply styling to an element? Classes. So if I want to change what styles an element currently has, all I need to do is be able to change its class. Well, I also want to make sure that I'm keeping track of the clicks. So I'm going to need a way of knowing how many clicks I'm on and incrementing it. So let's start working through this together. So first thing I'll do is I'll take a look at my HTML and I'll see what I have available to me. So I see I have, looks like a couple elements. So I have this main tag, which is just symbolizing it's the main content of my page. I have my button. This is where I'm going to want to listen for my click events. This is where I'm going to want to change some of those classes. And then I also have this paragraph tag where I'm keeping track of the clicks, where I also want to update it. We take a look at some of the styles that have already been provided for me. So I can see, all right, there's some built-in styles. I still have some styles being applied to the hot button. And I can also see that here's where the colors are being applied. So as long as an element has both the class of hot button and a class of cold, then it'll get applied this background color. Whereas then if the element has the class of hot button and cool, then it'll be applied this background color. But I now know I also see that the element has to keep both classes. So it's always going to maintain that hot button class, but the second class will change. So cold or cool or tepid or warm. So I know that I need to keep the hot button class, but I only want to change the class where the color is changing. So now I'll actually start working on the functionality. So I said the first thing I need to do is, well, I need to query the DOM. So I want to listen for our button. So I need to query for the button. So we'll query for the button. I'll call it hot button. Okay. What do I want to query for? Well, let me find it. In this case, I only have one button, so I could just query for the button. I also have a couple of different classes, so I could query for their classes. In this case, I won't know probably that the button is always going to maintain that hot button class, so I'll query for that class. I'll query for the hot button class. Okay, I now know I also want to update this element's text. So I'm going to want to query for this element as well. So I'll query for this and I'll query for it by its class as well. So click count. Now we'll do const click count. And then we'll query for that. Awesome. All right. So I have both my queries. Just to make sure that they're working, well, let's console log them. Let's make sure that I actually selected the things that I wanted to. So we'll do our hot button. And let's do the same thing for our click count. I gotta compile. So let's go into our what is this called? Our DOM manipulation. Okay, and let's open up our HTML. Console, move this over to the right, refresh the page, and nothing's working. Well, let me go check and see why. So I'm loading in a JavaScript file, but I do not have a JavaScript file. And it's because I went into the wrong folder. So I should be in starter files. Now, now let me compile. Okay, there we go. Now I can see for my hot button, I'm selecting my button right here. And then for my click count, I'm selecting my paragraph. I did a log, it was acting as a dir, but now I can see that my queries are successful. So now I verified that I am successfully selecting the elements that I want to. So the next thing I want to do is, well, I want to start changing some stuff. So I want something to happen when I click on these buttons. Well, in order for me to know when that happens, I need to listen for that event. So let me set up an event listener. So I want to listen or know when the user clicked on the hot button. So where do I want to add my event listener? I want to add it to the hot button. So we'll do our hot button dot add event listener. I want to listen for a click. And then what do I want to happen when that click event happens? Well, let's create our function. So I'll do our function. I'll give it an event parameter, just in case I need anything from that event object. And then we'll create our actual code block for this function. Now, what do I want to happen actually inside of this function? So I want to, when I click this button, I want to update however many clicks have actually occurred. So I need a way of knowing how many clicks have currently happened on the page. In theory, the only way that I have access to it right now is from the DOM. Already in the text content, there is a 0. So I could technically go and try to access it from the DOM and have to manipulate it, but it sounds like a lot more work. So the easiest way is to just create a variable. So what I'll do is I'll create a variable, let count equal to 0. It changed it to a const because I haven't changed it yet, but let me go and let me just update it right here. So the first thing that I want to happen inside of my click event is I just want to update my count. If I click on that hot button, that means a click has occurred. So I just want to update the number. So now that'll change from 0 to 1. If my number is changed, well, I want to update the text on the page. So now I want to access this click count variable, and then I want to update its text content. What if I didn't know what property I had available to me? How would I be able to know what properties exist on a DOM object? Anybody know what I could do?
We would have to get the properties from that.
But how do I know what properties are available to me? Like,
Well,
what if
we
I
have to console log it.
Okay, console log would show me the value. Do you remember what I can do to see the properties? Sure.
Console dir.
Yeah, so let me see what I can use to change the content of my click count. So let's do a console.dir my click count, and let's see if there's anything I could use to help us out here. Go and we'll check it out. Let's open it up. So I want to change the current content of this p tag. So let's see if there's any properties I can use to help us out. So the current content says clicks 0. So let's see if there's anywhere inside of here that mentions anything about click 0. Click count, no, that's just a class. I'm not seeing anything that says click 0. So here's a couple of options. So I can see right here, here's inner HTML. Here's inner text. Okay, that looks like a couple different ways that I can do it. Let's see if I have any other options. A lot of nulls. A lot of nulls. Looks like another option right here, outer HTML. Looks like this takes full on HTML. We have outer text. And we also have text content. So we can see right there, I had like 5 different ways of how I can change the text content. All of those would work. So now I just need to choose one. So I'll go with text content just because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So now this is how I can look at all the properties and see what I have available to me. This allows me to help dictate the decisions to know what I need to do. So now I know, okay, well now I want to update the text content. So text content's a property. Well, in order for me to access a property, I need to use either dot notation or bracket notation. So now we'll do our click count dot text content. And I don't just want it to show the number, I want it to show clicks and then the number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a template literal. So that way it's just easier for me to write out the whole thing. So I'll do a template literal. We'll do clicks. And then I want to show what the current number of clicks are. So where am I keeping track of that? I'm keeping track of it in my count variable. So now I will interpolate our count variable. And we'll go and we'll check that out. So now, if this is working correctly, as soon as I click on that hot button, then this clicks number should increment. So you see it did. Now it's 1. I move on. Now it goes to 2. And then it'll keep on going. So I've now accomplished 1/2 of what I've wanted to do. I'm now updating the clicks of my click.
So why? Just
Mhm.
question. So, because this one is a string and that one is a number, so we need to put the string, right? Because
What is a template literal? What data type?
it's a string,
So I'm already creating the string,
but there's a number inside it count.
but I'm embedding it in a string. So I'm creating a string.
Oh, why in mine it doesn't make sense?
It's embedded because it's embedded in the curly braces, right?
Because
That
I'm
makes
interpolating it.
interpolating it.
So I'm substituting the value in place. So if I did this, wouldn't work.
Oh,
Because then it would say type number is not assignable to type string. And then now I would need to do toString. But now this is only going to show the number
mm.
2, 3. I don't only want to show the number, I wanted to show clicks and the number. So that's why I did this template literal so that I can write out the text, and in the process it already converts it to a string for me because I've created a template literal.
Why mine is not the text literal is not working? I don't know why.
It's because you need backtick.
Oh, it's a back.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. Any questions about this so far before we get into the next part?
Why I'm having it says what I don't know why I'm getting error like it's it could be no.
Yes, I was curious why mine wasn't doing that. But
Like with an if statement.
let me try it in maybe, yeah, I think it's because the TS config. Yeah, there we go. So I'll just solve it in the solution directory instead, actually. Okay. So I'm receiving an error right here. And it says hot
Yeah.
button is possibly null. Why would hot button be null?
Because the compiler doesn't know if it exists or not.
Why doesn't it know?
Because it's not triggered.
Why is it not triggered yet?
Because we did not click the button. If you click the button, it's gonna be triggered.
It's not because we click the button. Where does hot button get created?
It's first we hold the values.
It's the first thing we do.
Yeah,
So that doesn't run when I click. This runs as soon as my JavaScript runs.
yeah, so it's already there. Why is it giving us?
You tell me. Does TypeScript run in the browser?
Oh, no, only JavaScript.
So does TypeScript know about the DOM?
only TypeScript knows,
Only JavaScript knows,
only JavaScript.
because TypeScript only runs in our code editor. JavaScript runs in the browser. So TypeScript cannot know if our query selectors are successful or not, because TypeScript does not run in the browser. So TypeScript doesn't know if our HTML has this element. So when I hover over a hot button, what does it say the type is?
Elemental no.
Element or null. So it's saying if your query selector is successful, then it will be an element. However, if it's not, what it's going to do is it's going to return null. So since I do not run in the browser, I do not know if this is going to be successful. I also am using a class, so I don't know what type of element it's going to be. It's going to be some element, but I don't know what type of element. So when this is saying hot button is possibly null, well, it's saying, what if your query selector is incorrect? So right here, let's say if I break it. So I added a couple D's to the end. Well, now when I try to click my button, oh, Is it
Should
Phil?
appears before.
oh, it's because I'm looking at the wrong HTML file because I changed. Now I'm getting an error. Cannot read properties of null reading add event listener. And it's saying cannot read properties of null. So whoever I'm trying to add the event listener to, in this case is hot button, is null because my query selector failed. So TypeScript is trying to help us out. It's saying even though I cannot run in the browser, you may be making a mistake. It may run, it may not. So this is why TypeScript wants us to check to make sure that it existed. So now by doing if not hot button, throw new error, and then we could say the query for hot button failed. And now you can see it got rid of the error. Because now when I hover over a hot button, what is the type? It's only element. Because now I said if hot button does not exist because of that exclamation point. So if it's falsy, if not true, then throw an error. So now if I break my query selector, well, now you can see that I'll get that error. And then it says the query for the hot button failed. So now I know that I made a mistake. And now if it's successful, then it'll still add the event listener. Yeah.
But why I'm still having the error, it says I have, because I didn't, on the click count, because I only made one if statement for the hub on,
Yeah.
not for the click.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, we can check for both. Or not click count. And then we could say the query for the hot button or the click count failed. I go back and forth with error messages. Like I don't consider this a good error message because it doesn't tell me what went wrong. It's telling me one of the things that went wrong. And now I need to figure out which of the ones actually went wrong. It probably would have been better if I would have broken this up into two different statements. So that way, if I got an error message back, it tells me the specific thing that's wrong. But either way, it's still accomplishing the same thing. It's making sure that they actually exist before we actually go and use them.
What about if we use question mark like option?
Question mark, yeah, it's another way of essentially getting past it.
I remember like someone told me, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But why, another question, why we did like again, checking if both exist, the hub on and click count.
Because
the if statement. in
There'll
the
be null
callback.
otherwise. Huh?
In the callback, we did the same thing.
It depends on how you do your callback. If you do it as an arrow function, you don't need to, which is why I use arrow functions.
But what about if we followed the assignment? Like
If you follow the assignment, if you were to create the function ahead of time, then you would need to. Because if I were to create the function up here. And if I were to do this. TypeScript does not know when this function is going to get called. So it's saying this function, now that it's standalone, can be used anywhere. It's not only tied to my event now. It can be called anywhere. So now TypeScript cannot guarantee that maybe this function is getting used in another file. and it won't know if click count is possible. But since I use an arrow function, TypeScript is able to see into my enclosing scope, which knows that I checked for my if statement right here, which is how it won't force me to check for it again here. This is why arrow functions for callback functions are really, really powerful, because they allow you to use the enclosing scope of its parent.
So the function can be used in even any file, right? We can call the function.
If you had the function right here, like standalone, yes.
Yeah, we can use it as like a similar what you did, like the other like manipulation when you put like comma in the name of the function. Similar to the same thing.
Comma and the name of the function.
And you put it in, you put them in a comment, sorry, put them in.
That
a
was for
comment.
ESLint. No, that was just for ESLint.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you'll learn more about that later on. Yeah,
To
Caroline?
include the function.
I was just wondering, but this is the global scope. You said something about an enclosed.
Yes,
Parents.
so I checked for the hot button and the click count in the global scope. Arrow functions do not create their own scope.
Oh, like this.
So they gain access to their enclosing scope, which in this case is the global scope, which is how it's able to see this if statement. Which is one of the benefits of arrow functions, is that it will take on the scope of its parent or whatever it was.
So
yeah.
for example, if the arrow function was in a function,
Uh-huh.
then it would
Then you
Just
gain
like
access to the
the
outer
all-
function.
do the outer function.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
Rukaya?
So I want to know, why have we used the or operator instead of and? Don't we want both of them to be true?
But that's in theory, yes, because they're both running at the same time. But I don't necessarily care if they're both correct. I just if one of them fails, then I want the error to happen. If I wanted to guarantee that both of them, then I could use and. But in this case, like it's kind of in this specific scenario, yes, you would use and. But if I was writing this in a way where I didn't care about them always being used together, I only care about one of them being wrong and I want an error to happen, then I would use or.
Okay. Thank you.
just a question, I noticed in the callback function that even like when you define the text, like when you define the text, when you hold the values of the object element. So when you if we use like the assignments way, how you create like a global function. So the callback even doesn't have any arguments.
No.
Yeah, although it doesn't include any argument, but in the global function, like in the callback function scope, we can use any variable, although it's not created.
And well, you have access to anything in the global scope.
Like for example, like when I followed the assignments, I created a text to hold the value of the click count, for example, text content. So I hold the value of click 0, click 1.
Yep.
This is outside the global function, which is the callback.
Yes.
The callback I call the
Yes,
handle
but your
click.
callbacks have access to the global scope. Everything has access to the global scope.
So the function can access anything, although it's not an argument.
Do you remember week 1 when we talked about tinted windows? If you're in a car with tinted windows, you can look out. But if you're outside a car with tinted windows, you can't look in. So if you're inside a function, you can look outside the function. But from outside a function, you can't look into a function.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's finish this off. So now I'm successfully incrementing my clicks. Well, now what I want to do is I want to change my button styles. So I had all those different classes: cool, tepid, warm. So what I want to do is, based off of the amount of clicks, I want to change the class that gets applied. So what I need to do is I need to check how many clicks there currently are. So let's pull up the instructions so that I can find the exact amount. So if less than 4, then the class name should be cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an if statement where it's going to check for all of our numbers. So if count is less than 4, Then what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna create a variable. I'm gonna call it temp. And I'm gonna do temp equals. In this case, it would be cold. Else if count is less than 7. Then temp is gonna be equal to cool. And then let me just copy this for simplicity. Okay, so else if count is less than 10, then I want this to be tepid. Else if it's less than 13, then I want it to be warm. Else less than 16. Then I want it to be hot. And finally,
Reset.
I would want it to be nuclear. Okay, so now what I've just done is I've created this temp variable. Format. I created this temp variable, and then I added a series of conditional checks where I check to make sure what based off of the number of clicks there currently are, then I change or assign a different temperature to that temp variable. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this temp variable to update the class of my hot button. So if you see right here in the example, the way that the styles are changing is the classes are changing. So the button has a class of hot button cold. Once I get to a certain amount of clicks, rather than cold, it'll go from cold to cool. So I want to update the classes of my button, and I want to make sure that it always has the hot button class, and then it gets that new class of temp. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do hot button dot class name. And what classes do I want to assign to my hot button? I want to assign the hot button class, and I also want to do temp. Let me change this to a template literal. So now my hot button will get the class of hot button, and then based off of however many clicks there were, it'll get a different temperature. Let's run it. Let's see if it works. So let's find our elements. So hot button cold. I click. My click's updated. 3. Now I'm reaching 4. So now cold should go to cool. Now we can see it went to cool. And we can see the styles change. The next one I think should be 7. Get to 7. You can see now the class changed. And now I went from hot button to tepid. If I keep on going, it'll go from there. Now what some of you probably did is you probably did something like this. And you did hot button dot class name equals, or you did hot button dot class name equals nuclear. Well, if you would have done that, you can see our element has hot button and it has cold. As soon as I click it, it lost the hot button class. Now you can see all my styles changed. So an important thing to note about class name is going to remove all of the classes an element currently has. It's literally going to take everything that you're assigning to it, and that's what it's going to assign to it. So it's going to lose all current classes, and it's going to take whatever you assign to it. So if you wanted to make sure that it maintained or it kept an existing class, that's why I needed to make sure that the hot button was included in the actual value, so that way it actually kept that class. Yeah, Caroline?
Why did you have to put the temp variable as a template literate if it's a string, just like the hot button?
Because if I did just a string
It would,
like this, then my class is literally just gonna be temp. It's not the value that got assigned to my variable. It's literally because I just created a string. So I want to take the value of my variable and I want to substitute it into the string, which is why I needed to do the template literal.
that's what the template literal does.
Yeah. So now it's not saying temp, it's taking whatever the current value of my temp variable is, and it's substituting it into the string, which is cool or cold or tepid. Yeah. And the only reason why I created the temp variable is just so I didn't have to repeat this line over and over and over again. So I could have done this, where I could have done hot button dot class name, hot button cold.
That's
And
what
then
I
I-
did
yeah.
as a string.
And then you could have done this, where you then cool. So it totally works. You could have done that, but now I'm repeating this line over and over and over again. Whereas then I could have just done it once at the end and just had that one temp variable. But same thing. It's just a different way of doing it.
Just,
Mhm.
just a question here, why, so the hot button, what? So if you remove the hot button, it's changed the behavior, although it's,
It's because of my styles. My styles are looking for an element that has both classes. That has a class of hot button and has a class of cold. So if I do not give it hot button, then my button
it's gonna
no
follow
longer has the hot button class, which means the styles are no longer getting applied.
Has to follow the same, how it's exactly written in CSS. Like,
It's not following exactly how it's written, it's just, this is telling me what classes an element has. An element has to have a class of hot button
button and cold.
and cold, so it's just telling me what
Temperature.
classes. Yeah, this is a class of hot button and cool,
Cold.
yeah. That's all it is. So that's why I need to make sure an element has both of those classes, so that way that selector will be applied.
And when you mentioned like when you put like, we cannot do like a hot button class name and the same line 25 in each.
You could, it's just another way of doing it, it's just rather than doing temp equals, you would just be repeating the same thing, so you would just be doing.
Yeah, quickly do
Showing
this.
you the power of the template literal, it can carry the value even though it changes.
So yeah, so you can still do cold or, and
No,
then,
I meant like without saying cold, I just want like the same line 25.
but this is what applies the different background colors. So that has to change. If I never change that temperature, then the background color would never change, because then it wouldn't ever get a second new class. So that's why I have to. So I mean, I'll show you, but if we
Yeah,
just
like
go
this.
back. So if we get rid of temp, if we just do hot button,
Nothing changed, yeah,
because it doesn't have that temperature class. In the way that my styles, I said an element has to have both of these classes in order to get this background color. So now since I am only applying hot button, it is only applying these styles that apply to that one class. It's not applying these styles that are applied to this selector.
And what? So we, in each if statement, the each branch, we're getting the value, then we assigning it to the last, to the line 25. That's just, yeah.
Awesome. We'll check out the quiz questions, and then I'll still have a couple other things that I'll talk about to wrap it up. But any questions about the solution, why I did things the way that I did, or anything else?
Could you,
Rakaya?
Why have we created count as a global variable? We could have created it in our function as well, right?
No, because if you create it in your function. Let's say we did this, right?
Okay, so every time it would go back to 0 and then 1.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's why I have to create it globally, so that way it got created once and then I just update the value. If I created it locally, then it would keep getting reset.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Trey.
All right, so you know me, I like to make things difficult for myself. I did on the conditional statements for the class name, I did it the hard way. But also, I mean, I've added a question mark after the $ hot button dot class name. So right before the dot, I've added a question mark.
Yep.
I've also done the conditional statement to throw the error if it doesn't exist, and I still get a null error.
You could try restarting your TypeScript server. So as long as you either have the question mark or as long as you have the other if not hot button, make sure you're checking for not hot button. So make sure you have that exclamation part. But as long as you do, then if you hit, are you on Mac or Windows?
Mac.
So Command Shift P, and it'll open up this menu. And then there's a restart TS server. So if you were to search for restart TS server, and if you click on this, then it would restart your TypeScript server. And sometimes that'll fix things. Sometimes TypeScript just kind of acts up and then it shows you an error, then when it's not actually an error, and then you reset the server and then it fixes itself.
Okay.
If that doesn't fix it, then feel free to send me over the snippet and then I could try to take a look.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Rukai?
What does the question mark do?
We'll learn about it in a few more weeks, but it's called the optional chaining operator. It essentially, it makes it so that it tries to access a property on an object or an element that could potentially be null.
Okay.
Yeah, so since we get that TypeScript error that says element could potentially be null, another way of technically overriding it or getting past it is by doing the question mark.
Okay, so we don't do the if statement then.
You still want to do the if statement because the if statement is still checking to make sure it exists. So like if whatever I'm querying for is critical for my application to work, then I want to check and I want to throw an error. However, if I'm trying to update a property on something that like is not critical, like for instance, if this fails, my application fails, for instance, because if I don't update the class name, like the whole point of this button, this exercise is for the button to update. So in that case, it would be better for me to do an if statement because I actually want my code to error out if this fails, because this is critical to the functionality. However, if this is something where if it doesn't happen, I don't want like my project to not go like, you know, fail or show an error or whatever. I just want to try to do something. That's where I would do the question mark. It'll try to do it, but it's not going to necessarily throw an error. But if I query and that query is wrong, then I actually want an error because something's going wrong.
Okay, okay.
Should I look at some of the quiz questions real quick? Trey, can you tell me what is the class name property of element objects?
A string representing the class name of an HTML element.
Exactly. Yeah. So a string that is representing the classes of an HTML element. So if I ever just want to see the current classes an element has, or be able to change the current classes an element has, then I can use that class name property. Noah, how can I update the CSS class attribute of an element using JavaScript?
Using the element object dot class name
Exactly. Yeah. But and then assigning something to the class name.
and assigning
So just like what we did, class name equals, I'm assigning something to the class name property. So yeah, so I can use the class name property, but I need to assign something to the class name property, and that is what will update that elements class. Caroline, what is the text content property of element objects?
It specifies the text in the element HTML.
Mhm.
And the text content property represents all the text content contained within an element and its descendants.
Yeah, exactly. So the text content property represents the text content of an element. And as you noted too, then it could also contain the descendants.
That's the
Yeah. Rukaya, how do you update the text within an element using JavaScript?
So by assigning something to the text content property of the element object.
Exactly, yeah. So just by assigning something to that text content property of the whatever element object you want, that'll go and update the text. Trey, is the event parameter of an event listener callback always useful?
I said no.
No, exactly. In this case, I didn't use the event anywhere, right? I didn't use event target, I didn't use anything. So it's not always gonna be useful. Say it's useful to know that I have access to it in case I want to be able to use the event object, I have access to it, but you're not actually always going to actually use the object.
I'm sorry,
The event parameter.
the event parameter?
Yeah, yeah, it's not always useful. Like in this case, we didn't use event at all. You see, like I didn't do anything with the event object.
But how come we can do that and still enable the click to happen? I thought that the parameter event,
No, the
It's not-
parameter is just what gets passed into my callback functions. This isn't what dictates the event to actually work.
oh,
This is what dictates the event to actually work, is the add event listener function. This is just the parameter. I don't have to even have a parameter. It's just if I want to access the events, it'll already get passed into it for me automatically. But-
if we want to access the event that we just created,
The event object
the event object that
of
we,
what, yeah,
of what was created.
not what was, I
of-
guess it depends on what you created, like.
or-
When you says like the, when we did like the event object where it shows like the target and that information or whatever.
Right,
When the event listener runs and when it calls this function. JavaScript will already pass in the event object for us. So I'm not creating the event object. When JavaScript calls this function, it's already passing it in for us.
okay, I didn't know, thank you.
I think Noah, would this assignment be simpler or more complicated if we didn't use a variable to keep track of the number of clicks?
The counter, the tracking the number is nothing. I think it's hard how to change the color and using the function counter.
I know, but if we didn't have a variable, how would I keep track of the number of clicks?
Yeah, we cannot keep track. Yeah,
So would it be more complicated?
yeah.
It'd be more complicated. But I still have a way of keeping track. I keep track of it from the DOM. So. We take a look. The number is right here. It's on the page. It says click 0. So in theory, I do have a number that is keeping track of the amount of clicks. The problem though, is that I have to keep working with the DOM to get it. If I want to get the current number from the text, I would have to grab the text content. I would then need to extract the number from it. Need to convert it to a number, increment it, and then do it. So I mean, we could do something real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but let's try
This
this.
is what I did actually.
So so I would need to access the click count.text content. So const current text equals click count.text
Yeah.
content.
Yeah,
And let me log it just so I see what we're working with.
yeah, that's.
Console. Okay, so clicks 0. So now what I want to do is I'm going to I want to get rid of all spaces. So I'm going to what is that method to trim, I think. I don't think I even need to do that. But I need to split it. Because I only want the number. I don't care about the clicks. I only want this number. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna split. And I want to split it at the colon. So now I have an array of 2 strings, clicks and 0. But I want to, can I do that? Perfect, okay, and that gets rid of the space for it. So now I have an array of 2 values, clicks and 0. So now I want to take 0, because this is telling me the number of current clicks. I want to convert it to a number, and then I want to increment it. So now I would say const current count equals current text at 1. I want to increment that. So I want to convert it to a number. So I'm going to do number. Convert it to a number. I then want to increment it. So current count plus plus. And now, let me make sure that this is working. So let me make sure that this is getting updated correctly. So current count. And let me get rid of all this other stuff just to make sure that this isn't screwing anything up. So current count
Yeah,
cannot
it's just a
sign because it's a const. So let's change this to a let. Let's test this. So current count is 1 now. Okay.
It's not increasing.
Yep, because I'm using the DOM. So now what do I need to do is I need to update the DOM again. So right now it's at 0. When I click, we can see it is going to 1. But now I need to update the DOM. So now what I need to do, click count dot text content equals clicks current count. Now it updated. Now it's going to pull it from the DOM again. It's going to update. It's going to pull it from the DOM again. So in theory, we could. But you see how much more work I had to go through? I had to grab it from the DOM. I needed to split the string because it wasn't just the number. It had all that other text. I then needed to convert it to a number. I needed to increment it. And then I needed to convert it back to a string and update the text content. So this is why it would be better to just use a variable to keep track of the number of clicks. It saves me all this other effort because it's already a number. I can already increment it, and then I can just already use it. I don't have to keep on accessing the DOM. Because now when I click, what do? Is I access the DOM again. What do I access the DOM? I access the DOM. So that's what this question was kind of getting at, is that
Could you just pin both solution? So this, yeah, it's just as is, if you can pin it to the Slack.
sure.
But for me, Sean, this is what I did. Every time when we click, we hold the value from the DOM in a variable, as you did. I
Mhm.
put it in the text. So I use the hardware, right?
Mhm.
And instead of doing like a one text content equal, yeah. Okay.
You're good. And then Caroline, why is storing information about a program in variables better than only storing it in the DOM?
So it is a pure reflection of the data source from our code.
Mhm.
And then easier testing, data processing and performance.
Yeah, for sure. The DOM operations are costly. So anytime we ever query for the DOM, anytime we ever work with the DOM, it could add up if we were to keep on doing it over and over. So by keeping all of our data in JavaScript, TypeScript, makes it more performant. It makes it easier because we have less steps that we need to do, and it's already just available to us in our code. So it's much easier to just have all of our logic and all of our data information kind of compiled together in their JavaScript. Awesome. We'll talk about 1 or 2 other things, but before I do, did anyone else have any other questions? Yes, no?
Yes, so you said, is it text similar to click count dot text content, the same thing, right?
What do you mean text?
So would the both way when you did,
I'm using text content.
is it similar if you did, holding the value of the DOM into a text, a variable? So similar to what you did, you see like current text,
Uh-huh.
is it similar to click count dot text content?
So that's what I'm doing. Click count.text content.
But here you just, yeah, so what is happening here in line 8 and line 12?
I'm accessing the current text content of the click count.
And in line 12,
I'm setting the content of the text content of the click count. So here I'm assigning Here I'm accessing.
So the first one, well, when you use an array to split the text content and taking the number and and the second one is
I'm just assigning a string to the text content. This one is just accessing the text content. So it's just rather than having to split on another step, I just chained it, so it all happens together. But all this is doing is it's just taking or grabbing the current text content of that DOM element.
so setting a value setting a value is like better than getting it and then
It's not better, it just depends on what you want. Do you want to access an element's current text? Or do you want to set its current text?
set it, it's like faster.
Two different things. Do you want to view your profile or do you want to create your profile? Two completely different actions. Do you want to view an element's text or do you want to set its text? Sometimes you want to do both, but which one do you want to do at that moment in time?
For our exercises, viewing it, it's easier.
It's not easier. We have to do both. If you ever needed to access an element's text, you have to access it. If you ever need to set it, you need to set it. It's not one versus the other, it's both. They have two different purposes. Just depends on what you want to do. Rukaya.
So out here it said that the text content property represents the text content of an element and all its descendants. What does that mean? Like, what do you mean by all its descendants?
Meaning like its children. So like let's say I had a div and let's say it had no, I've got the what is it? Div times no, hold on. Div times 5. There we go. Or actually let's do P times 5. Form. Document the query selected parent by compiling, you know, div class parent. I have a doc, it's a class. Why?
Why is it not?
Make sure I'm updating the, oh, I was updating the wrong file. This is the starter file.
There's so many ones.
I know, it's because I started doing all of these. Make sure, okay, now in theory, there we go. So you can see, Rukaya, I accessed the parent, which is right here, as this div. That div has multiple p tags, 1 p tag, 2 p tags, 3, 4. And now when I log the text content of the parent, which is this div, you can see it's showing me all the text content of its descendants or its children. So that's essentially what the text content is referring to, is if I access the text content of a parent, it's also going to show me all the text content of its children.
And if we were to change the text content of the parent, that would replace all of this?
Exactly. So what some people do, and they'll actually use like as like a nice easy hack, is like, what if I wanted to delete all of an element's children? Well, one quick thing that I can do is I can do parent.textContent equals an empty string. And then now, my
Delete
elements
the
even
one.
here, are they on the page? Now you can see they got deleted right here. So now they have no children.
Oh, okay.
Let me do that inside of our event, so that way we see this actually happen. So parent.textContent equals an empty string. So right now you see I have all my text content right here. We have all these p tags. As soon as I click, they all got deleted. They're no longer here. So yes, in theory, it would change it. Which usually you would only do that in the case of like right here. Like I just want to delete all of an element's children, and that's like a nice, easy way of doing it. But that kind of leads me into one of the other things. Sorry, Ricardo, did you have anything else to say?
No, just thank you.
Sweet. But that leads me into one of the other things I just wanted to talk about is the concept of getter setters. So certain properties are referred to as a getter, and certain properties are referred to as a setter, and some of them are both. So click or text content and class name are referred to as getter setters. They can be used to either retrieve the current state of something, or they can be used to set the current state of something. So we go, let me comment out all of this. Let's comment this stuff back in right here. All right. So go right here. Console log, click count dot text content. So on line 15, I'm accessing the text content of the click count, but on line 16, I'm setting or assigning something to the text content. Now, as soon as this will run, you see when I click, oh, assignment to constant variable.
Oh, any error like this is gonna, it's not gonna let you so it's gonna give you an error every time. If you, even if like small mistake, right? If there's like as well, when you see like any small errors, it's gonna like stop you, it's gonna give you like an error, see like this one. Assignment to content variable.
Yep, because this line right here.
Yeah.
Yep.
The error tells, that's cool, is that the error tells you usually a lot of information about what the problem is.
Yeah, for sure. Again, but you see how now my console log is firing. So right here, I'm logging the current text content, which is showing me right here. But then right here, I set it. So I log it, but I also set it. So they can be used in both ways. So it can be used as a getter to just retrieve the current state of something, but it can also be used as a setter. Same thing with the class name. When we do class name, it can be used as a getter. So if I just access the property, well, then it's just going to access the current properties of that element. But if I were to assign something to it, something new, then now it's being used as a setter. Now I'm assigning something to that class. So just if you ever hear that phrase, getter setter, that's just what it's referring to. Is a property that can either be used to just retrieve the current value of something, but it can also be used to set the current value of something. Any questions about that? Which is kind of what we were doing the back and forth earlier, where you were talking about the text content. This is why I was saying it has two different purposes, but they're used in different ways. You're either accessing the current text of the current class, or you're setting the current text of the current class.
Is it, I thought like getting it is like assigning it to another value.
You can. In this case, I'm just logging it. But what I could do is I can create another variable. So current classes equals. There we go. Now I got the current classes and then I assigned it to a variable. But I don't have to assign something to a variable. Just depends on what I want to do.
So we can do like a class name and immediately just assign it to, but we don't have like to hold it. It's like a,
What do you mean to hold it?
Like.
It just depends on what you want to do. Like in our case right here, I only care about accessing the class name of click count right here. So there's no reason to save this to a variable because I don't plan on reusing it. However, if I wanted to reuse these somewhere else, I would assign it to a variable. But if I just have something that I'm only going to use right there on that one line, it doesn't need to be a variable. I just access it.
If you go to the line to a 25, yeah, to 35, sorry. So we're just hot button the class name, you're assigning it. We're not, we're not planning to use it anyway.
Yes.
Just like a assignment.
But even in this case, there's no reason for me to assign this to a variable because I'm not storing the result of this. I'm running this. I'm updating the current hot buttons classes.
On the fly, like when you click on the.
Any other questions about the getter sitter? Okay, and one other quick thing. You saw when I was doing my little demo and I was looking for all the properties that I could use for the text. We saw that there were a few different options. There were like inner text, outer text, stuff like that. So the most common one you'll see is inner text. So let's say that we had a p tag, some text, and then let's say we had a span tag is not visible. And let's give this span display none. Okay, so I have a paragraph tag, it has some text, and then inside of that paragraph tag, there's a span element, and that span element has display none, so it will not be visible on the page. So now let's query for our P element. We'll do P dot text content, but also P dot inner text. And it's mad at me because I didn't check to see if it existed, but we'll just do that real quick. Oh. Target this one specifically. It was targeting the wrong p tag. Okay, so the first one, let me change this text content. So you can see while there are different options for text content, functionally there is a difference between these two. So inner text only shows the visible text on the page. So in this case down here, you can see it says some text. So inner text, if you would ever access the inner text of something, it is only going to show you the text that is currently visible on the page. Text content is going to show you all of the text, regardless of it's visible on the page. So you can see it says some text is not visible. If we were to look at the DOM tree, and if we were to look at this element, you can see that this p tag does have this text. It has the is not visible. But since it's in a span, and that span has display none, so it's not visibly being shown on the page, that's why inner text does not have access to it. It cannot see it. So just something to keep in mind. I usually use text content for everything. I don't necessarily use inner text because then I don't really have to worry about that where it's like visible or it's not visible. But just something to keep in mind that even though there are technically multiple properties that may seem like they do the exact same thing, there may just be some minor kind of differences between them. So versus inner text or text content, that's basically the only difference. Trey?
Would a screen reader be able to read the span if his display set to none?
Display none, if I remember correctly, removes it completely from the document flow, which would be like it's like kind of putting it on its own stacking context, like if you remember from the positioning exercise. So I think in theory, something that is display none would not get ridden. However, if you were to use visibility, so we use display none, But if I did visibility and I changed this to hidden, this would still get written out by a screen reader. So this is only visibly hiding it, but it's still technically a part of the actual DOM. So that would still get written out to the screen reader. But something with display none, no, it wouldn't.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Like, you could just repeat again, excuse me, I didn't catch it. So the inner text and text content, what are the difference again?
Text content will show all the text. Inner text will only show text visible on the page. Rukaya?
So say if I wanted to change the p tag to an h1 tag, I could do that with inner HTML.
Yes, I think that's one way. Let me look up. So let's do a console.dir on IP. So there's the inner HTML, which is, but inner HTML, you see, it doesn't necessarily show like the P, it's only showing like what is actually inside of that. So if I wanted to change this to an H1, there's usually there's a tag name. Now I wonder if in theory, if I could do P dot tag name equals H1. Cannot set property tag name of element which has only a getter. So yeah, so I don't think you can dynamically change elements to be other elements. I think like whenever you create that element, it has to stay that element.
I was reading up on Freecode Camp, and they said that when you print HTML, it does display the tag names. Like if
It
you would
displays the tag names of what's inside though. It doesn't, like in this case, so when we did P inner HTML. It's showing what's inside the P tag. It's not showing the P tag itself. So you can see it's only showing me what's inside the P tag. So I can literally write whatever HTML I want to change its children, but it's not changing the P tag to something else. In theory, I could change the span to something else. So if I did, you know, like p.inner HTML equals, and then I could do like an H1, some text, closing H1. And now when I run that, and if we were to look at my P tag, then now you can see its children as an H1. So you can use inner HTML, but it's changing the children inside. It's not changing the actual element.
okay, because I've shared this link with you, and on that it says that inner HTML example includes both markup and text. So
Yes, it is reading the HTML markup. That's why when I access the inner HTML, it's showing the span tag right here with the style.
can you scroll down further on that website here? Yeah, so you see here, I think a little further down. Yeah, so here it is reading those anchor tags as well. So that is what I assume that it does.
Yes, but it's doing it on its children. So they're accessing the inner HTML on the nav element, and inside of that nav element, it has the anchor tags. So you can see it doesn't show the opening and closing nav tags. It only shows the anchor tags.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah. So it will show the HTML, but it's only showing the HTML of its children. It won't show the actual HTML of whoever you're calling it on.
Got it. Thank you.
Which is right at 12:30. Were there any other questions about anything with DOM manipulation?
I
Yeah.
was just wondering about the span element,
Huh?
like.
Oh.
Why is it important, like, why did, for example, they use that there, for example, why would we use this, like an example, why we would.
Span? What if I only wanted to apply styling to like one word? So like
Oh.
inside of here, I have this whole paragraph text, right? Well, what if I only wanted one word to be a different color? So like, what if I only wanted not to be a certain color? Then what I can do is I can wrap not in a span, So that way I only change that one individual word. So now I can do, color yellow or whatever it is that I want. That's pretty much what span's used for. Is it's just if I have like an individual word or character inside of a bigger thing, I only want to change that. Like something that I'm working on right now is I'm building like an inventory management system. So you can see it says serial tracker and the colors are different. So I have this wrapped in a span. This is all one H1. But I have this, so I have the H1. You can see I have the serial wrapped in a span so that I can apply a different color to it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Any other questions about DOM manipulation?
Just to see the answer on the slide.
Well, the answer, I'm not gonna send out the answer. I'll send out the what mine is, but you still gotta do the exercise.
Yeah,
And then
for
I'll
sure,
send out
yeah,
the- all the-
that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'll send out the full solution. Yeah. This, and what I'm sending out, this is what you should not do.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, this is just how, if I didn't have a variable, how it would have had to have been done.
I feel like wanna hold
Yes,
the text for the.
If you wanna access something from the DOM.
this is just showing you the inefficient way of doing it without creating a variable. That's all this is doing.
Oh, it's not showing you like how to manipulate something from
No,
the DOM.
it's no.
Oh.
It's just showing you if I did not have a variable, how would I have been able to access the number and still been able to keep track of the count without having a variable? That's all
Oh,
it's trying to do. Yeah.
oh,
So if we don't have the counter variable, we're gonna take it from the actual text content.
Exactly. Right?
So the issue I mentioned with you a while ago,
Mhm.
the watch was working just fine. My problem was the conditional statement was outside of the function, so it was the tinted windows issue.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Awesome. Any other questions? All right, then we'll stop our share. We'll stop our records.